everybody, welcome back. So this week's focus is a 4-part tutorial series on specifically writing your analytical essay. So this is the next step in our whole process of preparing to show what we know. Okay, so we have demonstrated as we've been annotating our text that we do indeed know the play. We can break it into its component parts. We can show a connection between values, attitudes, and beliefs outside the text and the representations inside the text. We can name stylistic devices. We can explain the relevance of those stylistic devices. And now, because an essay is quite an effective way of showing the accumulation of what we know, we are working towards writing the best essay that we can write. So because this is quite a complicated process and no one wants to listen to me talk for 4 hours, I'm breaking it up into parts. And my hope would be that with each of the parts of the tutorial, you go away and revise how you actually apply the skills at that stage of the process and then come back and work to the next one. As you know, your handout that I have provided all the classes has 17 different essay practice questions that you can access. And what that means is you've got 17 different chances to develop your response to an analytical essay question and to apply the skills of these little tutorials. So each of these I'm going to try and keep it kind of short, but my goal is to really give you some little strategies to help improve the quality of your preparation and your writing. So let's get started. Okay, so first things first, what is an analytical essay and why is it that QCAA wants us to demonstrate our analysis in this particular format? Look, the reality is it's a really useful structure that is appropriate to a lot of different subject areas. And so I would hope that anything that you learn in these tutorials, you can actually apply in your other subjects. So do try and think, what have I learned with Mrs. Mack? How might I apply it in my extended writing in any other subject? So directly from the QCAA syllabus document, somewhat annoying when our little bar is along the top of it. So essentially there's no one way to write an analytical essay. And so because there's no one way, it's not so much about the formula as it is about the purpose. So the central purpose of an analytical essay is to introduce the reader to an interpretation of the text. And the way that we create an interpretation is by plaiting together some ideas inside the text with ones outside the text. So lots of you have heard me use that idea of plaiting together ideas now. So what we're basically doing is we're saying, outside the text where the author and the audience are, there are values, attitudes, and beliefs of things we hold as ideals and things that we would believe challenge those ideals, things that we think are legal, things that we think are illegal. And all of those are expressions of our values, attitudes, and beliefs. So where the author is and where the audience is, now those are outside the text. So they're going to be connected to the idea of context. We are plaiting together the context, or the values from outside the text, with the way that the characterization or the action within the text represents those values. Okay, so text and context. And that would be great if that's all we had to do. But we're also going to be asked to answer a question about not just all values and not just the whole text, but how does this text present one idea through the use of stylistic devices? So one idea from the context demonstrated through the text, and we as students are going to choose which aesthetic features and stylistic devices have been specifically used to position us. Okay, so every time we try and create an essay, we're always plaiting those ideas together. So analysis is written in a formal tone, and this is partly to do with your role. You are being positioned to write as an expert, something of an expert on this text. And certainly all of our work thus far has been to build your expertise. How comfortable and confident are you to talk about the text, break it down into its component parts, and really, tease out what each of those component parts might say about the audience that Shakespeare wrote for, or the message he's trying to convey. Because we're aiming for a formal tone, this means that we use correct literary terminology. So it's important that we know what a motif is, what a symbol is, what dramatic irony is, or how we make reference to it in a grammatically correct sentence as part of an essay. And we also have to use appropriate academic conventions. Now, these are things like using inverted commas for a quote, underlining the title of a text, using a capital letter for the name of the author, things like that. The audience of an analytical essay is already familiar with the text. So you do not have to retell the story in the belief that they need some background information before that they can understand your text. I promise you that one of the issues around, or one of the components required for selecting markers, is that we have to actually be familiar with all the texts that we are being asked to mark. And so that means that you can guarantee that your marker has indeed read the text and does not need a background synopsis. So the biggest thing, of course, when we're thinking about, well, what is it that I have to, or how do I write this essay then so that I get good marks? Yeah, that's important, but also so that I say what I want to say. The most important thing is not whether it uses a certain paragraph structure or has a certain number of paragraphs. It's actually all linked to this great thesis. So one of the best ways that you can spend your time between now and the mock exams, and then certainly from the mocks to your external exam next term, is practicing the writing of thesis statements. And we've had that idea of plaiting. In a thesis statement, you've got to actually show that connection between text and context and stylistic devices and offer that judgment. So this is the thing that will actually shape your analysis, and this is the thing that will ultimately get you the best marks. So we have thought about the context in which the play was written and the values, attitudes, and beliefs that are held as important. We've thought about the way in which the text manipulates those values. We've thought about the way stylistic devices have been particularly used to say something about those values. And we are putting that all together in our brains. And then we say, I think, and we form a thesis statement that offers our judgment of the way that the text was put together to achieve that specific purpose. After that, so after the creation of your thesis, the way you form your paragraphs, your argumentation, is a little bit up to you. Certainly, I'm going to show you a structure, but there's nothing that says you must write 3 body paragraphs to get a good mark, or you must write 2. You can write 2 really good, solid, meaty paragraphs, or you can write 3 slightly shorter paragraphs. I wouldn't recommend trying to write any more paragraphs than that, of course, because you do have a word count, 800 to 1,000 words. You are writing in a time frame in response to an unseen question. And more importantly, you actually have to show a pattern of evidence. So it's very important that what you include actually validates the judgment you've tried to make, and that you actually need to have that pattern. But the important thing is that there's nothing that stops you writing 2 good, solid arguments and not including a third if you feel you've made your point. Okay, so then what is analysis? So the essay is a way of showing what you know and what you can do way at the end of the process. So that's why we're talking about it as where we're going to. But an analytical essay isn't a job in itself. It is just the last step in a long process, and that long process is analysis. Now, you've actually been engaged in the process of analysis for the last 7 weeks. As you've read your texts, and as you've added your annotations, and as you've marked for references to theme and references to stylistic devices, you have been analysing. You've been pulling the text apart into its components, deconstructing. You've been finding patterns. You might have been offering evaluations, and then part of whether you say that evaluation out loud in class is a thought about, is this a reasonable conclusion I've drawn? Like, would someone else put together the pieces that I've put together and see a similar pattern? And if they would, then yes, it's a reasonable conclusion. So we, of course, are very familiar with these senior school cognitive verb posters. And the cognitive verbs, I mean, I know you've all seen these posters, but I doubt you've necessarily spent the time really looking at them. These posters do indeed break down the process of analysing. And when we think about getting to the point of writing an essay, we have to make sure that we're not skipping over this really important step of actually doing the analysis first. So we have access to a middle school, so year 7 to 10 cognitive verb poster. And you can see that the focus of this poster is that process. So just going back and having a look. So there's the little process. But look, you know, this poster includes a syllabus definition and some, you know, connects it to the other cognitive verbs and even gives you some sentence starters. But that means that the idea of this poster is that you've already worked out how to analyse. The process or the focus of this poster is actually teaching you that process. So you've been analysing all this term with a view to understand. So that idea of, well, what's my job in analysing? It was just to understand. Now, as we get ready for an analytical essay in exam conditions, the reason for analysing comes directly from our question. So we need to know the question in order to work out what it is I have to actually look at in the text and what use I can make of it. So then I identify those component parts. Well, that's my deconstruction. I pull it apart into characterization, into plot. I look at stylistic devices. I think about themes. I consider my symbols or my motifs. And all of those little elements are the Lego bricks of my text, and they will become the Lego bricks of my essay. But when I look at them, I don't need all of them. So I'll push some of those Lego bricks aside and I'll focus just on one of the groups. It might be characterization. And then I'm deeply looking at that particular component and thinking about what patterns I can see. Are there similarities in characters? Are there differences? If there are differences, why do you think Shakespeare has included those differences? Is it because he wants you to see what happens when a good character does something so that you can infer for yourself what might happen for a bad character? Are you supposed to see, as a cautionary tale, that the end result for this character would also be the end result for us if we went down that path? And so therefore we can work out how we think we're being positioned as an audience. Are we seeing a pattern being formed so that we can make meaning? So can I take a lesson away from the use of symbols or the references to blood or the absence of Christian iconography in the text? What conclusion might I draw? And so when I put all of the patterns that I find together, or rather when I put the pattern I find together, I then will come to a conclusion, and I have to determine whether it would be reasonable or logical to get to that end result. This is the process of analysis in every subject. So the evidence you might find as far as patterns will be different, of course, from English than it is from geography. It'll be different again from English to SOR. But ultimately, we are all working to that point of using our analysis to determine whether our answer is reasonable. So if you think that it's not possible in maths to have ended up with this negative number, then perhaps there's been a gap in your process of finding a pattern. And so you've actually asked yourself the question, is this reasonable, as a check, and then gone back and reworked your solution. After we have finished analysing, then we can look to see whether we've actually met the requirements of our question. And we do that in our planning stage, long before we put pen to paper for a draft. This ensures that our time spent actually writing our draft then is really productive and focused on connecting the dots, on keeping that thread going all the way through the text, not scribbling out and drawing arrows and trying to help your marker navigate through the messiness of your thought process. Okay, so that is the end of the first of the little tutorials. So if you are at that point where you're thinking, all right, I'm not sure I've actually analysed my script. I'm not sure I've actually broken it down into its component parts. Go back and review the early tutorials in the series. Think about the anatomy of a play. Where can you find the orientation, rising action, climax, falling action and resolution of the play? Who are the main characters? What are they symbolic of? What stylistic devices and aesthetic features are present? Can you name them? Can you identify them? Can you explain how they're used? Before you go any further with actually trying to answer a question, you need to ensure that you can be that flexible in your analysis and discussion of the text. If you're not, pause now and take the time to continue to review the text before you go any further with this little mini tutorial series. However, if your analysis is on track, you feel like you know the text really well, then the next component or the next little tutorial focuses specifically on deconstructing our question and making it work for us. So until then, see you later.